At the start of the 20th century, Europe was entrenched in a series of political and military alliances, and the world was teetering on the edge of war. Tensions were heightened by imperialist ambitions, nationalism, and military buildups. Despite these global tensions, the United States remained largely isolated from the conflict for the first few years. World War I began in 1914 with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. The war quickly spread across Europe as countries honored their alliances. The two main opposing alliances were the Allied powers, including France, Britain, Russia, and later the United States, and the Central Powers, including Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. At the outset of the war, the United States under President Woodrow Wilson adopted a policy of neutrality. Wilson called for Americans to remain impartial in thought and deed, and public opinion largely supported this stance. Many Americans viewed the war as a European conflict that should not involve the United States, especially given the country's traditional policy of avoiding entangling alliances. However, several factors made it increasingly difficult for the U.S. to remain neutral. Unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany's use of unrestricted submarine warfare, including the sinking of civilian ships like the British ocean liner Lusitania in 1915, angered the American public. The deaths of 128 Americans aboard the Lusitania raised tensions between the U.S. and Germany. Zimmermann telegram. In early 1917, British intelligence intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, in which German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann promised Mexico the return of territories lost to the United States, like Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, if Mexico allied with Germany in the event of U.S. involvement in the war. The revelation of this telegram outraged the American public and swayed public opinion in favor of joining the war. Economic interests. American banks and businesses had strong financial ties to the Allies, particularly Britain and France. U.S. loans to these nations were at risk if the Allies lost the war. Additionally, U.S. industries were supplying the Allies with war materials, making it increasingly difficult for the U.S. to remain neutral without harming its own economic interests. Ideological reasons. President Wilson believed that American involvement could help shape a post-war world based on democratic ideals. He envisioned a war to end all wars that would make the world safe for democracy. His vision included the establishment of the League of Nations, a global organization aimed at maintaining peace and preventing future conflicts. On April 6, 1917, after careful consideration and growing public support for intervention, President Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war against Germany. Congress voted overwhelmingly in favor, marking the U.S. entry into World War I. American troops, known as the American Expeditionary Forces, or AEF, led by General John J. Pershing, began arriving in Europe in 1917. Though the U.S. had not yet fully mobilized, the influx of fresh troops and resources provided a much-needed boost to the Allied powers, who were exhausted by years of trench warfare. The U.S. played a pivotal role in several key battles, such as the Battle of Cantigny and the Meuse-Argonne offensive, which helped to tip the balance of power in favor of the Allies. The presence of American forces, both on the battlefield and in terms of economic and logistical support, helped to hasten the end of the war. While the military engaged in combat, the American home front underwent significant changes as the U.S. mobilized for war. The government took steps to direct the economy and society towards the war effort, War Industries Board, WIB. This government agency coordinated industrial production to ensure that materials needed for the war effort, such as steel, oil, and munitions, were efficiently produced and distributed. Selective Service Act. The U.S. government instituted a draft calling millions of men into military service. By the end of the war, nearly 4.7 million Americans had served in the military. Women, and the war women, played an important role in the war effort, taking on jobs in factories and serving in non-combat roles in the military, such as nursing and clerical work. This helped to bolster the push for women's suffrage, which culminated in the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. African Americans and the war. Over 350,000 African-American men served in World War I, but they often faced segregation and discrimination both in the military and on the home front. However, the war raised questions about racial equality and contributed to the early stages of the civil rights movement. The U.S. entry into the war helped the Allies secure victory. In November 1918, Germany signed an armistice, effectively ending the fighting. President Wilson's idealism was reflected in his 14 points, which outlined his vision for a post-war world based on principles of self-determination, free trade, and collective security. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended the war, but it imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, military restrictions, and significant reparations. Wilson's proposal for the League of Nations was included in the treaty, but the U.S. Senate refused to ratify it, largely due to opposition to foreign entanglements. Domestic consequences. The aftermath of the war led to a period of disillusionment and social unrest in the U.S., known as the Red Scare, marked by fear of communism and radical political movements. The war also led to changes in American culture as it brought new economic prosperity in the 1920s but also deepened divisions within American society, particularly over issues of race and immigration. Global consequences. While the war's end marked the collapse of European empires and the redrawing of national borders, the Treaty of Versailles and the punitive measures it imposed on Germany set the stage for future global instability and the rise of Adolf Hitler and World War II. This chapter of American history, Connecting to the Past, emphasizes the transformative nature of America's involvement in World War I. It examines the factors leading to U.S. entry, the country's contributions to the Allied victory, and the lasting social, political, and economic effects of the war. Despite the victory, the war left the U.S. and the world grappling with the complexities of a new global order, foreshadowing the challenges that would emerge in the years following the war.